hot. You're going to, yes, please turn them down some. Josh is going to do that. We are glad to welcome you back. I know we were off last week with the picnic. Steve is out yesterday and today, and we'll be back in the office tomorrow. Just a quick reminder, we're doing the series on the armor of God. If you haven't been there the last couple of weeks, be sure to catch that up online. But enjoy finding out how each piece of the armor works in terms of our day-to-day life, which will be a really exciting thing. Josh is going to have the fun tonight of teaching about adultery and divorce. So that we rolled the dice, and he got this topic. And
I think they're lying on that one. I think I was out 2 or 3 weeks, and they said, "What can we do to punish Josh?" So no, it's all good. It's always good. What is it? We're always encouraged to preach from the whole of Scripture. So if we can't tackle the tough stuff, well, not fulfilling my calling, I guess. That's one way to think about it. But no, should be a lot of fun. This is just a little too high for me. There we go. But yeah, so if you're online, welcome. And Shelly introduced what we're doing and what's been going on. Sorry, me and her were both chit-chatting, and I look up, and y'all were on there, and we weren't up here. But like Shelly said, we're continuing our thing on our session on the Sermon on the Mount. Shelly, I wasn't here last time you taught. Did you kind of take a moment in time to talk about the idea of the antithesis section?
we did.
I figured you would have. You're very good about that. So we'll briefly cover that again as we jump in. But why don't we start out with prayer, and then I'm going to share a praise, and then we'll dive in. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for our time together tonight. Lord, I thank you for the time that our church body gets to come and to study your word on Wednesdays. Lord, I think we probably take for granted that we have this time where we have an hour that we just kind of dedicate to studying your word. We don't even do that on Sundays, where we have just one solid hour of seeking your word. So, Lord, I just pray that you would just help us to appreciate that. Lord, that I pray that you would use it to grow and develop us as disciples, Lord, in this discipleship-focused time. That you would use it to put your word into our hearts, and it would challenge us as we think about the application of that as we go out and live. And so, Lord, I just pray as we look at some pretty uncomfortable and pretty tough passages tonight, Lord, that you would use it, that your word would speak to all of us, Lord, that you would give Shelly and I your words as we talk about it and lead in the group. And Lord, I just pray that you would move tonight. And I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Well, to start out, I want to take a second and just highlight a ministry of our church. So there's a ministry that Dan and Marilyn Nays started called Harvest of Life Prison Ministries, right? And then they have a partner in Dan and Evans and Sarah Evans who also partner with them. But Dan has his part of the ministry. He was sharing with me beforehand that he is, you have connections, and when in this ministry, they end up being throughout the whole country. And he came in tonight just super excited and wanted to share with me some of the copies of the letters that he's been getting from this place called the Federal Correction Institute in Fort Dix, New Jersey, where God apparently is doing a revival, and they are getting just request after request after request for revivals. And he said, Josh, I've probably shipped out more Bibles in the last 2 weeks than I ever have. And so that's just an incredibly awesome thing. I think it's really cool. It's a ministry that our church partners with. We call them our ministry partners, but they're ministries that church members are a part of that our church directly supports, these ministry partners. And so I think it's always cool when we take time to share praises of how God is doing and how God is working through members of our church and the ministries that he's called them to, and through the way their church also supports these ministries through our finances. And so it's pretty cool. And so Dan wanted me to share that, and I wanted to share that because anytime someone's a ministry leader and they walk in, they're like, let me tell you about my ministry because you won't believe what's happening, that means there's something really cool of God going on. And I think we should celebrate that. And so we just, as you go from here, as it crosses your mind, pray for what God's doing. Pray for him to help us continue to support and to be a part of what he's doing. So we had a really positive note. So now let's move into the Bible. Yeah, go
Before
ahead.
we start on that, you might want to tell them about next Wednesday night.
Yes, next Wednesday night, Steve told me, don't forget to tell him, we will not be in here. So don't come to the fellowship hall next Wednesday night. If you're online, don't tune in to look for the Bible study. We are going to be having our quarterly business meeting, which means it's our regularly scheduled business meeting. We have 4 of those a year. So it's where we go over our second quarter reports, where we talk about our attendance and small groups and finances and kind of any business of the church. So that'll be next week at 6 p.m. So if you're watching this online and want to be a part of that, look for information on that in the e-bulletin on Sunday. And if you're not get the e-bulletin on Sunday, call the church office on Monday and ask how to get it put on the e-bulletin mailing list. So I think that covers everything for next week. So 6 o'clock, hopefully it'll be just a normal business meeting, and maybe we'll all get out a little earlier than normal, right? That's always good.
It's always nice.
Always nice. So, as we begin, as we've already said, our topic tonight is adultery and divorce, or lust and divorce, whichever one you want to call it. So it might be a bit uncomfortable at times as we talk through this, but it's an important thing. So it's always uncomfortable, Shelley, isn't it, when we're addressing sin?
Absolutely.
Yes.
None of us like especially our pet sins, or sins that it's easy when it's something we can point our fingers at somebody else and say, if they do this, or this is a terrible thing, but it's whenever we get close to anything that might touch us or might challenge us, then, no, let's just skip over that and go to the next section. Or let's do the fun sections. Let's do the praise sections. Let's do the encouragement sections. Let's do the challenge sections. Let's just don't mess with my sin.
Yeah. So I kind of say this way: if you're in the room, you might want to kind of buckle up into your seat. I'm not coming at you hard to beat you up, but it's just like Shelley said, it's not very comfortable to talk about sin, particularly if it gets too close to home. And then if you're online, this is not a time to hit pause or hit the X, and jump out and watch something else. This is something that we should always deal with. And I thought of it as my example. I want to tell you why we need to be here and why we need to teach through these kind of passages is because I feel like Jesus is giving us a safety briefing. And I think most of us don't work in industries where we have regular safety briefings, and maybe you do, and maybe it's just me that's the exception, but we all know what a safety briefing is, right? It's where you have a time before you enter a situation to talk about the dangers of it, because usually there's some kind of thing that the situation deals with that could maim, harm, destroy, outright kill. It could severely hurt you. And so what Jesus is doing in this particular section of the antithesis, the 6 antithesis of the Sermon on the Mount, and I'll redefine that here in a second, but in these he's kind of saying, hey, you know this from the 10 Commandments that you shouldn't commit adultery. I need to help you understand this in a different way, in a deeper way, because this is a very destructive sin that can destroy you, and you need to stop it at its source and at its root, so it doesn't get to that point. And so that's kind of the summary of where we're headed, the roadmap to where we're headed. So Shelley, do you want to talk about the 6 antithesis real quick, or do you want me to just give the quick summary?
I think they're bored with me doing it because I've done it the last 2 times. So
I
why
got
don't
you.
you do it?
So here's a fun thing, a way to think about it. Excuse me. I'm trying to not lose my voice. I feel like every time I go to teach, my voice is fine until I start to teach, and then it wants to go away from me. But so just bear with me if I feel like I need to clear my throat too many times. Oops. The hole's on this side. At least I caught it before it went everywhere, right? Okay. So I have a fun definition for the antithesis. It says, antithesis is used in writing or speech either as a proposition that contrasts with or reverses some previously mentioned proposition, or when 2 opposites are introduced together for contrasting effect. So it's really this first part of the definition is what Jesus is using. It's used in speech as a proposition that contrasts with or reverses some previously mentioned proposition. So for us, when we read this passage, it's going to be the we'll go ahead and use the way that we all know the Ten Commandments, right? Thou shalt not commit adultery. This is what his listeners are hearing, and they're listening to him preach, and he's going to say this in Matthew 5:27 through 32. He says, you have heard it said, okay, right? What would they often? They would sit there and they would go to the tabernacle or the temple and they would hear the law read. So you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. They're going ding, ding, ding. Obviously, 10 Commandments, big deal. Also, just to kind of give some context, Shelley, what was the punishment for adultery in their culture?
Stoning.
Yeah, you got killed, most likely. If you didn't, should we describe stoning? I always find it fascinating. I didn't never know what stoning looked like until I say looked like. Someone didn't show me how you get stoned. But I had a Bible teacher, a video series that I did where the guy goes to these places. His name's Ray Vanderlaan, and he kind of shows you how stoning would happen. What they would do is they would tie you up, push you off a cliff, and then everybody who wanted to say that you were guilty of the sin would pick up a stone, any stone that they could carry. So big stone, you could pick a small stone, but whatever it was, and then they got to drop it on you. Just one, but they got to just toss it down there on top of you. And if you survived, you survived, and if you died, you died. You can imagine most of the time the fall probably killed you alone. But that's how stoning works. So that was the seriousness of this sin in their culture. I tell you that kind of really quickly, and it felt like a little whimsically, but we're talking about this was a sin that they associated with, that it was heavy enough and weighty enough that it deserved murder.
Capital punishment.
Capital punishment, right. So Jesus says, you have heard it said, so he's trying to get them to think in a different way about something they already take really seriously. You shall not commit adultery, okay? Verse 28 of Matthew 5, it says, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Think about what he just said, right? He's already said, anybody who's even had the desire to commit that adultery is already guilty of death, or deserved of death. So he says, I'm going to read again. If you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And that's where we're going to focus a bunch, but let me just go ahead and finish reading the passage for us. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to go into hell. All right, so we'll talk about the next part when we get to the next section on divorce, but we're going to talk about this. What in the world what is Jesus trying to do here? He took this really serious 10 Commandment, which they knew had a very serious, and he's getting them to think about it in a different way. So he's trying to get his listeners to understand that their thinking on adultery was incomplete or not correct. Instead, he wanted them, because, Shelley, how would you describe, in their minds, what did they think adultery was?
The actual sexual act of being with somebody who you were not married to.
Right, very simple, legalistic definition there, right there. Mm-hmm. I think of it in this way. As I was reading, I brought the commentary I use mostly to do this, but I like the way that they kind of broke this down. They talked about the sin, and there's the heart side, there's the eye side of this particular sin, but then there's the hand side, or the physical action. So they were sitting there going, oh, as long as I've not done the physical action of adultery, then I'm righteous, I'm good, right? And Jesus is trying to get them to understand that, hey, it's more than that. Sin almost always begins as a heart issue. So what he's trying to get at is says the sin doesn't well up and manifest itself when you actually commit the act. The sin wells up and is committed when it leaves your heart, I guess, is the best way to think of it. And so he's wanting them to get that in their mind. And I'm going to take a detour from my notes for a second, Shelley, and tell a quick story.
Okay.
But I think what Jesus' purpose is, he's wanting them to understand it this way, because I think this is how we as people think. right? We sit there and I think as people, we think, how close can we get to something on one side or the other and stay in bounds, right? That's often what we're thinking about something. So in this particular sin, I think what he's trying to get at is in our minds, we often think, well, as long as I don't do this, this is probably the line here, so I really haven't done anything wrong as long as I don't get past this point, right? You understand? You were with me? So one way that I always think about this, I had a pastor when I tell an illustration when I was a kid, and so kudos to whichever one that was, but I always still remember the example. And so I'll see if I can tell the story quickly. But the story in the short version is a man wants to hire he lives on a mountain and he wants to hire a stagecoach driver to drive his family from the town to the home, up and down the mountain. And he goes to the drivers and he gets the horse and buggy, I guess, and he says, hey, will you drive me to my house? And as they're driving, he goes, well, how close can you get to the edge without going off? Right? And so they show him, and he's like, oh, that's pretty good. And then he goes to the next guy, and he can get closer, and he can get closer. And he gets to this guy, he's like, man, I can get right up to the edge. And he finally gets to one, and he asks the guy the question. He says, well, how close to the edge can you drive the stagecoach without going off? And he says, I'm not going to do that. My goal is to stay as far away from the edge as possible. And so the illustration that pastor had used stuck with me. It was like, that's how we need to be thinking about sin. It's not how close can we get to the sin before we enter into it. It's how do we try and stay away from the sin so we're never even close to falling into it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of the idea that Jesus is trying to get their brains to flip the thinking in. So Shelley, I'm going to give you this question.
Always scared when he does this.
No, this is good. So I kind of gave that example. Are there any kind of examples, because this is kind of back to the antithesis side, any kind of good examples or cool examples that you can think of that help us try and reverse our thinking or something that's happened to you? And so I'll give you an example that like I was thinking of. A lot of times this happens to people when they like there's a song that they love or there's a poem that they love or some kind of, usually in the art world, and then they go to the author, or the writer or the painter, and they get to hear them talk about the piece, right? And they're like, this is so amazing. It just means all these things to me. And then they go listen to the person, and then guess what happens? They go, that's not what the original author meant at all. Oh. Their intention was totally different, right? And I feel like that's, again, what Jesus is trying to do. So I don't know. Well, I guess what the question I have for you is, in your ministry and your counseling part of with people, like, is there any things that kind of come to mind when you're trying to help people realize they need to flip their thinking?
Okay. All right. So when you shared that, you reminded me of something that that I experienced before I ever went into counseling, and then let me share something from that. I guess I'm in high school, so somewhere 16, 17, 18, something like that. We were I was with a group, we were in New York City, and we got to go to a New York City fashion show, okay? Now, I don't know, 16, 17, fashion was a big thing there, and, watching these awesome models go up and down the runway and do all this stuff, and we were just so odd. It was like so cool. And so we went out to lunch to get something to eat after this, and we were like, wow, and this and that and the other thing, and just talking about it, oh, want to do this, and of course we're all looking and thinking maybe we should get lettuce and not something else to eat so we can all be skinny like the models. And one of the girls, not one of the supermodels, but one of the girls that had been one of the models, she and some friends came in and sat at a table about 2 tables over. So we're all thinking, should we go get her autographed, this kind of thing, because we're excited, we're impressed. Well, she sits down with her friends, and all I can tell you is almost every word that came out of her mouth was an expletive. She had the pottiest of potty mouths that you've ever heard. And all of a sudden, everything that we had thought about her it just tanked. She didn't even look pretty to us anymore because her mouth was so horrific. And what came out of her mouth destroyed the image that we have. And I think that that's something, sometimes things can look really good on the outside, but then you get up close and personal, and you find out that it's really trash. Something that, we have a word actually in counseling that we use with things, it's called the word reframing, where you get people to take a different perspective of what they were looking at. They're looking at it and they're thinking it's okay. There is a classic story that's told about reframing. It kind of goes like this. There was a Chinese farmer who had a wonderful son. Several children. His oldest son is big and strong, and and they raise horses and they take care of the farm and all. And everybody looks and says, "Oh, what a wonderful son you have! What a wonderful horse he rides, and all this." And the farmer says, "Maybe." About 2 or 3 weeks later, the army comes through and says, "Oh, what a fine strapping young man and a horse. Let's take them for the army." And the farmer says, and the river says to the farmer, "Oh, it's so terrible. They took your son and his horse for the army." And the father says, "Maybe." 4 or 5 weeks later, the son comes back, no horse, limping. And everybody goes, "Oh, your son's back." And the farmer says, "Maybe." Okay? Every time he looked at the situation, he was reframing. Maybe this is a good thing, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not. And reframing is a way of taking something and just looking at it and kind of twisting a little and taking a different perspective. Because something may look like a really good thing, but give it a few weeks, give it a month, look at it again, may not be as exciting or wonderful as you thought it was.
Yeah, I think that's a great example and a great segue, because it is, Jesus is trying to help them reframe, and then also I think that obviously directly applies to the desire of the heart that we're going to talk about. So let's kind of read through this again, and let's talk about why, we talked about what Jesus is trying to do, but we're going to jump into a little bit of why is the sin of adultery so serious that Jesus is feeling the need to reframe it. So let's read this again. It says, "You have heard it said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust or lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And then he gives us these very big extreme things to do, right? "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one member than the whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right eye has caused you, or right hand has caused you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell." So first off, Jesus is trying to help us change our understanding of adultery. We just kind of mentioned that, and this passage is labeled in our, at least it is in the ESV, lust. But we've already established that the adultery is the main sin here. But why is this what Jesus wants us to reframe? Why is he wanting us to understand this? And so, go ahead.
Can I jump into that
Yeah.
with a verse?
Yep.
Okay. So if you'll grab your Bible, I'm trying to get mine right here. Go to James chapter 1. I want you to see something here. It's very important. If there's a passage I quote in the work that I do more often than not, this is the passage. This is a passage that comes up with almost anybody who's dealing with stuff. Starting in verse 13, it says, "And remember, when you are being let me change versions here real quick. Get to ESV where everyone's using. All right. Okay, come down to 13. Okay. "Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am being tempted by God.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, neither does he tempt, and he himself tempts no one. But every person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire." It's the same word that in Matthew gets translated as lust. It's the same word. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. See that passage? From the lust to the sin, from the sin to death.
Yep. And so that's a great passage that sets up for this. I'm going to read Jeremiah 17:9 real quick. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" So, those kind of two things, Jesus is getting at that this is a heart issue, but why is it so dangerous? That's the next kind of thing I wanted to go through. And I felt like Dr. Aiken, he was quoting someone else, so, we'll give that guy credit. When we open this, I'll pull up his name. But this guy wrote 6 reasons why adultery is serious. Don't you love pastors when they write things? They can't just write 1 paragraph about it. They got to write 6 paragraphs about it. But needless to say, I want us to go through this because when I was reading on this today, and this kind of, when there is so much, it kind of causes you to stop and you think, and you actually have to contemplate why it is really serious. Because I'm going to bet for most of us that we've not committed the physical sin of adultery, so we don't stop and think about just how bad the consequences are. But if Jesus is sitting here trying to say, hey, if you've done this in your heart, well, these should be the same consequences for us, so therefore we need to understand what he's warning us against. So the first one, Shelley, he says, is adultery is the turning away from a promise. What's that referencing?
The marriage bond.
Right.
The commitment, the covenant that you've made between you and God and another person.
So I figured Shelley knew that. She does a lot of marriage counseling. So, but that's true, right? When who's in here's been to a wedding? If you're online, you can raise your hand too. We've all been to a wedding, right? What is one of the verses that they always read? What God has joined together, let what? No man separate, right? So we talk about marriage, and at least if you're in a, not that you're probably going to have me marry you, but if you were ever in a marriage service that I performed or had me do your marriage service, we would start in the beginning talking about it, that this is a promise, just as Shelley just said, between you, another person, but it's also between you, that other person, and God. Mm-hmm. So in doing this, when we commit adultery, it's causing us to turn away from a promise that we made with God. It's causing us to break that relationship of trust that we have with him, and that is a really big deal, right? Shelley, when we lose trust, is it easy to gain back?
Oh no.
We all know that, right?
Right.
Trust is so hard. Go ahead.
And there's when I'm talking with people about this, I know this man has used the word promise, but I'm going to tell you, I don't ever use the word promise when I'm doing marriage counseling. I always use the word covenant. Okay, because in our world, if you make a promise, it's an intention to do something.
You only hope to keep it.
And you only hope to keep it. But a covenant is a bond.
Right.
And so I'm always using the word covenant. And I'll say, I use the word covenant because I want you to understand when you enter a covenant, you're thoughtfully entering something that you are committing yourself to for the length of that covenant. And by the way, the marriage covenant is unto death do us part. So I want you to take, and I do this to people, I make them look at each other and say, all right, I want you to look at each other. Can you see yourself living with this person till they die, or you do? And that's kind of a shocking thing with people. Oh, because they're in the exciting part. It's it's great, it's wonderful, But there are days when you do look at that other person and say, "Oh, I hope you die soon." I mean, let's face it. Who in a marriage has not had a day where you kind of thought, you get over it, but for that day, maybe you'll die or I will, just something to get me out of my pain. But yes, if you break trust, if you break that covenant, it's really hard. I will tell you that when I deal with people where adultery has occurred and they're working to bring their covenant back, less make it than make it. Okay? And even the ones who make it not only go through a lot of tears and anger, but a lot of times unless they stay super, super committed to the covenant process. The other person tends to fall at some point into some sin. You know, it's kind of like, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you.
Mhm.
And so trust it's a huge thing.
Yeah. So the second thing is adultery leads the adulterer from security to chaos. I think that, I feel like he was searching for more things to make his list 6, but there's truth to this. Shelley, when you counsel someone who's in this, is their life settled, peaceful, and easy?
Oh, my heavens, no. You know, fact is, back in the 90s, when divorce care was first kind of coming into being, before there was divorce care, there were some other group stuff, and one of those group methods used the phrase dump her and dump E. You know, that when somebody was contemplating getting a divorce, they were going through all the questions of should I not? It kind of like getting into adultery. Should I take this step? Should I not take this step? You know, until they made a decision. Well, once they make a decision, well, then they're ready to act on it. And they want the other person who's all of a sudden being told, oh, our marriage is over? You're going off with this person? You're in love with someone else? They expected that person to get on the program with them. Now, they may have taken 6, 8, 10 months to come to that position and decision, but they want instant response from the other person. So the dumper is ready to move on with their life. The dumpee is caught in the total chaos and shock of everything that's going on. And most of the time, the dumpee had no clue coming down this path of what's going on.
I think one of the things I think about when I read that, it's easy to go, of course, but, you know, and this kind of goes to an application side of things, but, you know, I think the question that often we need to ask ourselves, you know, if we're tempted to want to lust in our heart that again wants us to commit adultery, that we have to remember that it's life destructive. And I think one of the things, that, at least for myself, that I always like, you know, my wife will say something, if you're married, I'm sure she's said something like this, or maybe you've said something like, oh, don't you wish you didn't have me, or those stupid things that married couples say when things aren't the easiest, right? And I go look at her and go, no, of course I want you, right? Because to do anything else would be to throw away everything that is good, right? Think about that. You know, in your life, if you were to lose your spouse because you left them for someone else, it's going to be throwing away a lot of things and cause a lot of scorched, you know, bridges to be set on fire, scorched earth. Bad things are all going to start happening from that single decision, right? And I think that Jesus is trying to get us to understand that that we can start to have that, you know, inside or before the actual act of adultery has occurred, when we let it well up in our heart. So we've kind of talked about it from the physical action or the hand side of things, but Shelley, I bet you can kind of speak to this too. If let's say someone hasn't committed adultery, but if things are bad in the relationship and the person has some kind of thing where they are actively committing it in their heart, is there still peace and chaos in their life?
Yes.
No, I don't think.
No. Is there peace or chaos? Chaos.
There's chaos. Yes, I said
Yes.
yes. Is there peace or chaos?
Or chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, and if there's chaos already,
Yes.
right? It may not be as complicated, but it's certainly, you know, life inside that relationship isn't easy. You know, like that idea we think like, oh, it'll be all okay unless we cross the line, but it's not okay well before we cross that line. Wouldn't you say so?
Yes.
And so I just think of, you know, it's a good reminder of the consequences of it. This one was really straightforward. He wrote, adultery is secretive and dishonest. Shocking, right? I think it was an interesting point. He just says, I think he wrote this just to prove that it was evil, right? Because when there's a wedding, what do? We put it out there for all to hear and sing of, you know, sing. I guess what I was going to say, we sing tales of Jubilee or something, I don't know. We get all excited, don't we, right? We put it in the newspaper. That was an old thing to do, right? There's no newspapers anymore, but we put it out there for all to know that we're having a wedding. But if we how many people ever saw the advertisement online or in the newspaper that said, hey, I committed adultery, woohoo! Anybody? Anybody ever seen anybody do that? No, right? It's already secretive and dishonest inherently, which shows that it's evil and has bad intentions. You want to say something there?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to bring up the elephant in the living room,
Oh, goodness.
okay?
I'm going to sit back.
In today's society, adultery isn't necessarily just when you engage with another person that you know and you are sexually active. I'm going to push this when you talk about from the heart. Our world today has made pornography super, super easy for people to get. The fact is, on the internet, how many of you know the term clickbait? Okay? Clickbait is when you see a picture and you click on that, and then it will hook you into something else, and then you can get into certain ones where once you click, you can't get out. And they can lock you in, and then they lock you into more and more pictures and stuff. And there's a lot of people that think, well, it's just pictures. Okay? Let me tell you, from working in sexual addiction work, that when you look at the levels of courtship, people who involve themselves in pornography, they lose the foundational levels of courtship, which are notice, attention, flirtation, and demonstration. They lose their ability to interact with another human being. Why? Because in porn, you're the only person involved. You get what you want, when you want, from whom you want, in whatever way you want, and you don't have to give anything back. It's the ultimate selfish act. And when you do that, you pull yourselves out of relationship with other people. Because, see, all you're doing, you're getting your sexual desires met, but you're not having to risk anything. And the toughest thing about marriage is risk. As much marriage counseling as I've done, when I had two people sitting in there and they have to open their mouth and they have to share with the other person something that is tender or scary or vulnerable for them, that's a huge risk, because they're going to face this person and they don't know when their words are going to come back at them. But when you're involved with porn, you're not at risk. You just get what you want. And that's why I think Jesus says it starts in the heart. To look at starts at the heart. It's a decision to get what you want for yourself. And that's the ultimate thing that is the antithesis, truly, of what Christianity is all about. Because isn't Christianity about serving others and serving God and diminishing so that He can increase? Can you see the path that it leads? And let me tell you, porn leads to other forms. Okay, so I'm not going to name, but there's certain internet sites that you can go from porn to hooking into finding other people in your area that are interested in the same things that you are. Some of you probably know what those sites are. I'm not going to say them out loud because I don't want to give anybody ideas. But that can lead people into starting to have hookups, meetups, and all sorts of stuff, which then can lead you into situations where, as happened to somebody, they met up with somebody and the person had video cameras. And then they started to blackmail the person. Okay? I mean, there is a tumble of things that can happen. But it started with the first thing, a little click on the internet that led to another click on the internet that led to another click. Back in the days of print stuff, what I used to say to my people was, you buy it, you bring it. That's a pretty horrible thing. You buy porn, you bring it to session. We look at it together. Now, unfortunately, I have some images in my head I would like to get out. That was a dumb decision, but I was a young therapist, and I thought I was being really cool to do this. But it caused them to have to deal with the fact that they were doing something in the darkness, and I was forcing them to bring it to the light. Secrecy and dishonesty, and you start lying about one thing, then it gets easier to lie about another thing, and lie about another thing, and lie about another thing. And this is one of those deadly destructive things that can destroy your relationship from the inside out, because you become dead inside. And then that affects your ability to be connected to someone else.
I think all those are great words, because it shows exactly kind of, it's an internal heart sin, and that is not, in Jesus' day, I think he would have obviously, if Jesus was in our day, he would have obviously addressed this issue inside of this at the same time, and much, I think, the same way Shelley just did. I'll say the fourth thing was, we've already then covered. It says, adultery destroys the adulterer, it erodes their integrity and eats away the inside. When we let ourselves sit there and be dissatisfied, so we go to seek something elsewhere, and pornography is a place that is readily available for someone to be tempted and to fall into that. It certainly allows that. And that's why I think that Jesus, and why I felt like it was important for us to teach this lesson, just because we live in a world where I can hear people say, or know people say, like, well, I didn't commit this physical act, right? I haven't done anything wrong. But inside their life, and you look inside of it, guess what? There's no peace. There's chaos. It's destroyed. Their insides are completely gutted. There's no more integrity, right? And the whole relationship is already undermined, even though there was nothing physically that happened. And so this is another one. I think this is interesting. It said adultery damages society. And I thought that was a really interesting point he made. He says, because there's so much brokenness that comes along with it. Because it just doesn't affect the adulterer and the one who's been, betrayed, right? It affects all the relationships that they have with all the people in their lives too. And there's a lot of hate and anger and strife and things that get stirred up by that. And so adultery damages the society around it. Do you want to add any of that? You want me to just jump to the next one? But it hurts children. I mean, obviously, I think we go, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. But I know when I was reading, one of the things I was reading today, author just wanted to put in there just to kind of reiterate. He had quoted an article written by lawyers who had done like 3,000 divorces, and just felt the need to write about the horror of what they've seen that this causes in relationships. And this is on the divorce side of things. But, in adultery, it hurts children. It hurts people who are innocent. I wanted to read this to us from the commentary that Dr. Aiken put together. He says, adultery does grievous harm to an innocent party, children. Children are harmed. When adultery brings chaos and conflict and disunity, no wonder then that the Bible contains such serious repeated warnings against it. And this is why he says, adultery kind of gets to the end. It hurts the innocent. And then listen to the way the Bible warns. These are going to be Bible verses of warning against adultery. It says, can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes and not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. That's Proverbs 6:27-29. He who commits adultery lacks sense, and he who does it destroys himself. Proverbs 6:32. And let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. Hebrews 13:4. And I think that just kind of is a nice way to sum it up. God has made it very clear that not only says, hey, I don't want you to do this, but I don't want you to do this because it is destructive and bad and will ruin your life. Their misunderstanding was, oh, well, adultery is really bad, we should kill the person. But I think what Jesus is trying to get at and says, no, when you commit this, you've destroyed your life. You have essentially killed yourself. And so I think because of that, and to move on, is he tells us to take it really seriously. And how does he do that? Well, that goes back to, what did he say to do, Shelley? When we were tempted, you want to read it? You want me to read it? I guess that was rhetorical when I said that to you.
Yeah.
He says, here's my verse. It says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Mm-hmm. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell.
All right, so there's some cultural implications there. In case y'all didn't know, the right side was considered the side of strength. Fact is, the firstborn son was called the son of my right hand, okay? And so when Jesus is saying, if your right eye, if your right hand offends you, pluck it out, what he's saying is, don't even let things that you find necessary or easy, things that make your life convenient. If the things that make your life convenient are harming you, get rid of them. Okay? So like if an open internet without any controls on it is harming you, get it password protected. Give the password away. Make someone else have to open it. Be accountable. If being in a text message with somebody is starting to cross the line, block the number. Block them. If you have to, get a new phone. Okay? It's saying get rid of those, even if it's convenient for you, even if this thing works. I mean, most of us like having our eyes, and most of us like having our hands. It makes life really convenient for us. But he's saying if what is convenient, what makes life easy, is causing you to move into sin, be willing to let go of the convenience in order to not sin.
Yeah, I like the way that he wrote about it in this way, and I just want to just read this. It says, the main idea is this: sinful lust will lead you down a dead-end road. It will not deliver what it promises. You think it will make you happy. Jesus says it will lead you to hell. And I wanted to point that out, but this is what Shelley's talking about. I think it's important for us to hear. So if necessary, take whatever steps you must to deal with sinful lust. I liked this part. He says, act decisively, immediately, even if it is painful. The drastic nature of the remedy is simply the index of the radical danger of the sin. It is not a situation for negotiation. And I felt like that was a really great summary of what, Jesus was trying to do here. He said, Jesus, doesn't that sound pretty drastic to do? To pluck out your own eye or cut off your own hand? And I like the way he said it. He said, the nature of the remedy Jesus gives should warn us just how dangerous the situation is. Right? Because I think just to give us world examples, if we're going into a radioactive area, what kind of level of precautions do we take? A lot, right? And if you are exposed, what level of urgency is it to be treated?
Right, decontaminated.
It's fast, right? It's immediate. It's necessary. We understand that in this world when certain levels of bad things happen, we understand the immediacy of the need. And Jesus is trying to get us to understand, hey, the danger of allowing yourself to get close to this is so high that it's not a time for negotiation. It's a time for I like this. He said it was a time for act decisively, immediately, even if it is painful. Like Shelley said, I thought that was a great example. If there's a person that's causing you to be tempted, it's a whole real painful to change your phone number. Just think about how many places you have to go change your phone number if you changed it nowadays. Like, I'll give you an example. How many things are two-factor authenticated through your cell phone? Probably every account that you own. But that pain is worth not destroying your life. Sounds a whole lot less painful, doesn't it? Oh, I just have to go update my phone every single place, than have my whole life ruined. And I don't think we just treat adultery enough in that regard. And I felt like that's why I wanted to spend the most of tonight's time, but we're seeing that we're running out of it. Shelley, I want to jump to this part.
Okay.
I kind of created some things, I always like to give application. And I was going to ask you about what are some ways we can place guardrails to prevent it. You've already mentioned this. But I think there's two types of guardrails. There are reactive guardrails and there's proactive guardrails. And so I put this: reactive ways, recognize what tempts you. So that when you see it, you react, right? If you know what tempts you, It's a reaction. I know that's tempting me. Have a plan of how to get away. And at the same time, when it begins to sin, so when lust wells up and it begins to want to take you to a place, take it seriously. Do not wait for the actionable consequences, because then it's too late. If you don't get that through 45 minutes of us talking about the dangers of it and the consequences, then I don't know what more I can say. When the physical action occurs, it's already too late. So deal with it immediately. But these are the ones I wanted to stick to the most. Proactive guardrails work so much better, or so effective. And I wrote this one because this is something that I've learned since I've been in high school when dealing with sin. The best way to deal with sin is to crowd it out. Do you understand what I mean when I say that? I used to sit there, and I remember being in high school, and I used to sit there and pray, God, please help me not sin. And I would I'm not going to sin, 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 I'm not going to sin. I sinned, right? And you start over again, Lord, please forgive me. I'm not going to sin, 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 I'm not going to sin. I sinned, right? And guess what I learned? What was I still doing that whole time? I was still thinking about the sin, right? And so it was always right there in front of me. And what I found was the more I sought God, the more I tried to be focused on the things He wanted me to do, guess what? I thought about the sin a lot less, so therefore I did the sin a whole lot less. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is so simple, but I tell you, it is so effective. You know, we want to figure out how to not be over here and want to be over here. We'll try and get our focus to stay over here, and we'll find ourselves not drifting and winding up over here a whole lot less. And then I put this one, because so much of what we've talked about is inside of a relationship already. It said, I put work on the health of the relationship you already have, so there is no need for outside fulfillment. And I'm sure Shelley could give us loads of just great examples and things to do about that. And you know, I can tell you this is kind of a testimonial. Katie and I have been married 7 years, some years back now, to be 10 years this month. That's crazy to think about, by the way, that we've been married 10 years this month. But we kind of took some time. We were in the process of moving back here, so we had this kind of strange month in life, right? Duties are wrapping up here. We're trying to sell our house. We have nowhere to live for a month before we start work here. That's just how it laid out. And so we decided to take time to read 2 marriage books. And so people are like, what are you doing? And I'd be like, well, we're working on our marriage. And immediately you say that and you feel like all these caveats to go, oh, no, I promise nothing's wrong, right? It's like it's taboo and it's not normal to say, I'm trying to improve my relationship. Because we associate improvement so much with what? Deficiency. But in reality, when things are at their best, something that's already good, when you focus on improvement, that's how you go from good to great. Whoever wrote that book, I forget his name, but there you go, I plugged it for you. But not really, so I've heard it's good. I've not actually read it. But
it is good.
It is good, I know. But in seriousness, right? In the work world, we get this. If we have a great employee and we take them to their yearly evaluations, what do we still want to give them? Ways that they can improve, because we want to make that good employee a great employee, and we want to make a great employee just an employee we hope that never leaves. We understand that. We think about that with teams, don't we? If we meet the greatest prospect we've ever met in sports, right, what do coaches do? They still give them constructive criticisms to improve so that they can go from a great prospect to an amazing prospect, from an amazing prospect to a world-class prospect, right? You know, and so the thing is, why do we not sit there and ask in our marriages, why do we just want a marriage that works? Why do we not want it to go from a marriage that works to a good marriage, to a great marriage, to an amazing marriage, to the best thing that's ever happened to me, no questions asked? You know, that's what I think of, you know, when I think of proactive. For some reason in church, and I guess I'm on a soapbox a little bit for a second, you can either amen me or tell me something else, you know, of a better way. But I think it's so important for us to work on the relationship that we have, because when it's good, guess what? It's the same kind of idea. It's crowding out, and there's no need to seek fulfillment elsewhere. Mm-hmm. You want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay.
Because I want to give you enough time to finish.
6 minutes, guys. We can do divorce. That's funny. Any lawyers in the room? Nope.
Okay.
All right. Guess we can't do it in 6 minutes then. Just kidding. All right, verse 31. It is also said, a.k.a. remember Jesus kind of referencing teaching that they would already know, whoever divorces his wife will let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife except for the grounds of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. There's so much to be said here, but the thing that I want to get into with this from the reading that I did today, that I had never heard this. This was new information for me when talking about this or having someone write on this topic. And it gave context into why Jesus felt the need to say this. So during this time, and hopefully this writer's right, hopefully Danny Aiken's done his own research, but he said there was 2 rabbinic schools that dominated the discussion of Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4 about divorce, right? And that one kind of said this, the school of, you're the Hebrew expert, Shammai?
Shammai.
Okay, good. The school of Shammai taught that sexual sin was the only permissible reason to end a marriage by divorce. Hey, that's what Jesus says here, right? And he says with the school of Hillel, is that right?
Yeah, Hillel.
Hillel, did I say it right? Close enough? Okay. The school of Hillel argued that anything a wife did that displeased her husband provided valid grounds for divorce. Hillel's position would become the dominant view, and Quarles skillfully demonstrates how, that's the person, he's quoting someone else's work here, demonstrates how pervasive this position became. And so he begins to quote all these Hebrew texts that were written about 200 years after Jesus said this. And guys, if we had time, I would read all of this to you, and you'd be mad at me because it's like 3 paragraphs. But the guy literally goes on, and basically anything the wife did, the way she looked, the way,
If she burned the toast.
Yes, it's in here.
Literally, if she burned the toast.
Like anything, the school of thought in the day was anything that your wife did that you didn't like essentially gave you the grounds to divorce her, and it was permissible.
Mm-hmm. And let me demonstrate what divorce was, okay? Imagine this is my sandal and I'm the guy, okay? I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. It's now done. She had no say in it. All I had to do is take my sandal off in front of the people at the gates and say that to her 3 times. And it's over. It's why, like the story about the woman with the lost coin, it's why the women wore their coins in their headdresses and in their belts and all, because at that moment she was put out with whatever she could carry. So they always kept their dowry on them because they never knew, because he could do it at a whim.
Yeah. I thought that
How's that for marital security?
I had never heard that before. I've grown up and listened and read a lot of things, but that gave so much clarity, and that's what I want to share tonight. Because if on surface we're like, oh, this is pretty simple. God opposes divorce. There's only one prescription for when it's permissible. And one thing that I think is worth pointing out, he says it's permissible for that one reason, but he doesn't say what. He doesn't say it's required. Right. And so God desires restoration in every sin, in every brokenness, right? And so, Shelley, in 3 minutes, I think an important thing for us in the church today, that there are people who have been divorced and have been remarried. Can we take a second and talk about what that restoration from God and forgiveness of God and what that looks like in divorcees today? Because I was struck, I was listening to someone grieve their sin of divorce, that they had before they had a relationship with Christ. Mm-hmm. And, this person had been married for years and years and years and raised a family, very godly person, and yet they still felt guilt from that prior sin. And so I think that I would just like for us to take a second, and I'm sure you've counseled couples who have had that in their past of how do we understand Jesus' words of saying that this commits adultery, and yet understanding inside of God's forgiveness and grace and what his expectations are if divorce happens. I know I gave you a lot.
It'd be nice if he'd prep me before he just tells me about these things up here at the
well,
table.
I can start talking and then you can take a second.
One of the questions, we're really quick to think about the sins that we've committed as being covered by the blood of Christ at the cross. But we're always quick to judge other people for their sins. Either what Jesus did on the cross was complete or it wasn't. You fall on one side or the other. If what Christ did at the cross was complete, then understand that your forgiveness is bought at a great, great cost. You have God's forgiveness, but you have it at the cost of the blood, the sweat, the tears, the agony, the giving up of life from the Creator of life to give you new life. And that is a sacred, sacred gift on the part of Christ. And when we really step into the understanding of what it means to be forgiven, we don't take it lightly. It's not cheap. It's so costly. It does two things. One, it's cleansing. When you really, truly understand that you've been forgiven, it's cleansing. But the other thing it is it's motivating. It's motivating for you to go from this point forward, living in that grace, living in that forgiveness, and being open to allowing God to conform you to the image of His Son. I always say to people, one of the restrictions, limitations God put on us is that we live in time. We can't go back. We can only live now, and we can only use now to prepare for the future. So in the now, honor and serve Him in the relationship you're in. Give Him, be the person that God called you to be in this relationship right now. And glorify God. If there are amends you need to make and you can, do it. If not, pray for the person that you have harmed, or pray for the person who has harmed you, but live in the now and move forward.
Yeah, I just wanted us to hear that, because what came to my mind when I was prepping for this piece, and it was funny because the passage was the woman caught in adultery, but it was what Jesus said in the end. He doesn't say, it's okay what you did. It's okay the sin. No, he doesn't say that at all. What does he say to her? Go and sin no more. So he's like, I forgive you, but go and sin no more. And I think that that's an important thing for us to understand, particularly for some reason this sin tends to want to be sticky in the sense of trying to say, you messed up and you're broken, but you're broken forever. When we don't let other sins necessarily have that same level of stickiness. And so no sin has that stickiness when it comes to God's restoration and forgiveness. And so God's able to amend, and that doesn't mean there aren't loads of consequences, right, with some sins. We've obviously spent a lot of time talking about that on the previous sin of adultery. But I just think that that's important for us to take that moment and to end with as a church, that this particular thing when Jesus says, it's not like you've caused them to commit adultery and continue committing adultery to the end of time. I think he's trying to get at an issue that was pervasive of that day. And at the same time, the timeless piece is God doesn't want divorce. He opposes divorce. When it happens, though, he can still forgive and restore, and his desire is for if they enter into the next relationship, for that to be the same kind of level of covenant. That same covenant is meant to be just as strong as the first one. It's not like, oh, well, done it once. I'm getting too far in the weeds here. But what I'm trying to get at is there is forgiveness, and it grieved me as someone to hear someone feel guilty of a sin that they committed prior to even salvation. And that doesn't, I know sometimes it happens after, but I'm saying just God's forgiveness is enough even in this area. And so I wanted us to close with that. You want to pray for us?
Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that Jesus was so honest with us, and that he didn't turn his eyes from the things that people want to keep in the darkness and whisper about, but that he was willing to shine the light, even though he knew it would make people hate him and resent him for it. And I pray, Father, that we might too be willing to shine the light on our sin. We might be willing to bring it forth, clear it out, do what is inconvenient in order to glorify you. And Father, I pray for each person here tonight, because we're all challenged by something that we desire. For some people, it's another person or it's a sexual experience, but God, there's other things. There's cars and watches and iPhones and computers and all sorts of stuff that we can lust after. And I just pray, Father, that for all of us, we would be reminded that there's no object in this world or person in this world that can replace a relationship with you. And we ask that we would be mindful of that, that we would enjoy our relationship with you, that we would be so filled up with it, as Josh was saying, that it just literally crowds out the lustful desires and the sinfulness. And Father, I pray, because I know in people, I know in a group this size and people listening on the air, that there are people who have struggled or been harmed or hurt by the struggles of others in this area. So Father, I just pray for healing, for grace, and for peace. And I pray, Lord, that if you place conviction on any heart, that they will take the steps tonight to begin to turn away from that sin and turn back to you. And I pray this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for coming. Remember, business meeting is next week at 6. See you all there. See you Sunday.